Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. See lots of folks chiming in from where you're coming from. Thank you for joining us on our webinar this afternoon. My name is Melanie Flowers, and I'm the Chief Workforce Strategy Officer here at Craft Education, and I am thrilled to be moderating today's conversation, Economic Engines, Workforce Boards, and the Future of American Talent Development. Wow, I'm looking at the chat and it looks like we've got people from all over the country. I'm seeing workforce leaders, educators, employers. This is exactly the kind of room that we wanted to have today. One quick housekeeping note that before we dive in, we'll be saving about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for audience questions and answers. So please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A box or chat at any time during the session this afternoon. And our team will be keeping an eye on them and we'll make sure we answer as many as we can at the end. And before we review our goals and our time together, we'd like to know what best describes your role or your organization. Take a moment, I see it popping in there. Let us know what role you play in this space, answering the question in this poll here that just popped up. Thank you guys for doing that poll. We'll leave it up for just a little bit. It's great to see such a range of perspectives. That's awesome. Awesome. All right, so I want to set the stage for our conversation this afternoon. And, we want to talk, we're obviously talking about workforce boards, and they were established under the Workforce Investment Act, WIA, in 1998. And since then, they've become one of the most important and often underappreciated engines of regional economic development. Workforce boards sit at the center of employers, educators, policymakers, and communities. But as expectations rise, so does that pressure, right? So today, we're going to be exploring three big ideas: what workforce boards actually do, what it takes to modernize and strengthen them, and then what separates boards that will struggle or may struggle in the next 5 years, or boards that will thrive in the next 5 years. And so let's take a moment to meet our panelists. I'll invite each of them to briefly introduce themselves. I'll ask that you share your name, your organization, your role, and one thing you believe that workforce boards are uniquely positioned to do right now. And Kristen, we'll start with you, then we'll do Jane, and then Josh.
Great. Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be with all of you. My name is Kristen Fox. I'm the CEO of the Business Higher Education Forum. We're a national coalition, nonprofit national coalition of businesses and higher education leaders, community college through four-year institutions that work together to make sure that higher education is building pathways that are responsive to the needs of businesses. So complementary, and relevant work to the work that workforce boards are doing. And did you want me to answer the question around the what? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Mhm.
I got in I'm located in snowy Boston and got in very late last night from really warm Phoenix, Arizona, where I'd rather be right now. So minimal sleep. Thank you for bearing with me. So I think in this moment, workforce boards as organizations that bring together federal funding, that bring to and have a unique mandate to serve employers and workers and have deep regional relationships are uniquely positioned to channel and navigate the dynamic, fast-changing labor market that we are in at this moment, and to bring resources that are uniquely positioned to their resources and solutions that are uniquely positioned to their communities. So, looking forward to talking more about that in our call today.
Yes, me, I'm excited. Jane, over to you.
Hi, I'm Jane Oates, a recovering government worker, but and now consulting, mostly with Working Nation, but with a lot of other clients, both corporate and nonprofit. And have to tell you that I think I am very fond of the Workforce Board since I was part of that team in 1998 that put it together. But I think the best thing I can say about Workforce Boards is they're the little d democratic entity. Everybody can come to an American Job Center. Everybody can come there regardless of their work history, their age, their abilities or disabilities. So I think they're the great equalizer, and I'm a big fan of them.
Awesome. That's awesome. All right, Josh, we'll round it out with you.
Yeah, sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Josh Kopis. I'm a senior director here at Jobs for the Future, commonly referred to as JFF. I've spent most of my career in and around the public workforce system. Most of my work here at JFF has really been about trying to understand and work within that intersection of workforce boards, training providers, and employers, really to help transform systems to make sure we're creating better opportunities for people and for regional economies. JFF has a very specific North Star goal of 75 million people getting into quality jobs by 2033. The workforce boards are some of our most important allies at JFF and really helping us get there. And I think, Melanie, for me, that's what keeps me coming back, working with the workforce system, working with, future focused workforce leaders is really just my continued faith in the fact that workforce boards are just really one of the few institutions as Jane mentioned, have that kind of proximate leadership everywhere across the country, but also have the scale to really help figure out how to turn this whole problem of helping people get good jobs into something that's really not just a matter of luck, but a matter of design.
Sure.
And workforce boards really just sit at the center of that promise of really being able to create opportunities for people to find good jobs and for us as communities to be able to do that very deliberately.
I love that. Very well said. So, as you heard from our panelists, we'd love to hear what's top of mind for you all. So, we're going to launch another quick poll. So, please take a moment to select the area you're most curious about today, whether that's employer engagement, policy and funding constraints, modernization, partnerships, metrics, outcomes. We'd love to hear what's top of mind for you because that's going to help us kind of drive the conversation a little bit more detailed if we can. So we'll leave that up for a couple of minutes. All right, so it looks like there's a tie, almost a tie, between partnerships and alignment, policy and funding constraints, and then third would be employer engagement. All right, great. So hopefully that's helpful context for our panelists as we go through this, and we'll be sure to lean on those themes, especially when we get down to the Q&A. All right, so before we jump into myth busting, let's zoom out for just a moment. Workforce boards exist, as Josh said, to align the local workforce investments with economic demand. And they convene employers, they steward funding, they translate policy into action. But in today's environment, rapid technology shifts, employer talent shortages, increased accountability, their role is quickly evolving. So in the chat, in one sentence, if you could describe in one sentence how describe how workforce boards today, like in one sentence. I was going to do it in one word, but that's impossible because they do so much. But if you can describe a workforce board in one sentence, drop that in the chat. Oh, out of touch. Wow. Okay. Advisory in nature. Underutilized. I agree with the underutilized. Behind the times. Okay. One-stop shop. Misunderstood. Connectors I saw. The connection point. I always kind of call them the conveners, right? you were to imagine like a beehive and all of the different things, the job seekers, the employers, the training providers, government, they're like the maestro of the employment ecosystem. Okay, great. So let's just jump right in. So workforce boards sit at the center, as we mentioned earlier, of so many expectations. Employers want talent, job seekers want opportunities, and policymakers want measurable outcomes. So let's start by doing a little bit of myth busting. And Jane, I'm going to start with you. What do workforce boards get blamed for unfairly, and what should they truly be accountable for in your mind?
So clearly, they get blamed all the time for not doing enough training, then not sending enough people to training. This from elected officials who have reduced their funding every year since 2000. But I think what they should get credit for and what they should be measured on is what their activity is in the community. How many employers are they talking about? Is their board relevant? Too many times when I go to visit boards, retirees are sitting on the boards. There's nothing wrong with retirees, but they're not hiring anybody.
Yeah.
And I think having active businesses on the board, particularly those businesses in their communities that are looking for workers. The other option is they put big names on there. And as we know right now, a lot of the big name employers are reducing staff because of adoption of technology. So I think if I were to say one thing, it's stop blaming them for not training enough people, because the bottom line is they do so much more than training. They're giving people the confidence to go out and look for a job. They're helping them brush off their resume. They're helping new entrants into the workforce, whether young people, mothers that are coming, back into the workforce, or quite honestly, seniors who are going back into the workforce. They're helping everybody. And those people don't always just need training. They need confidence building. They need all the ancillary services that people talk about. And those things are not measured clearly enough.
No, I agree 1,000%. I sit on my local workforce board, and you're right. We see we don't see publicly. We see the measured. Oh, this particular person got trained, but what did it take to get that
Yeah.
person to be able to go to training? It may have been childcare, it may have been transportation, may have been food. You just don't know. And so you're right. Workforce boards don't really they don't really get the shine, if you will, on all of the wraparound services and things that they do. So that's pretty awesome. Kristen, I want to follow up with you. Let's get your insights here.
Yeah, and so I'm going to give the employer perspective in terms of thinking about, what is it that is really needed from an employer point of view from workforce boards, and where's there friction and where can we, I think, do it better, and acknowledging that resource constraints, right, are real, and so it's about focus and prioritization, and this webinar chat, this crowd really goes for it. This is a really meaty chat. I like it. But I do think, from an employer perspective, and I think Jane's comment around mid and small size businesses, or that it's not necessarily right the big organizations in a region who need to be the only ones at the table, but it's about talent pipeline development, right? Help me as a manufacturing organization that is struggling to find a CNC machinist, help me connect to whether it's the community college or the training programs that I can work with, and help me, scale that, and find, both develop and screen and find, right, talent that I need, and be that connector. Also, the on-the-job training is a really big part, that especially those small and mid-sized employers need, that I think is really critical, that most employers don't necessarily know about. And some of that same stuff around incumbent worker training. I think where there's friction is where, and where, workforce boards can get an unfairly so or fairly so bad rap, right, is around, there are mechanisms that can cause it to feel compliance vision driven, not business driven. And those are real. In many cases, employers don't know what their local workforce board offer, and the resources that are available there. And oftentimes there's siloed relationships where you're not sure who to go to at the workforce board or the right person at your organization doesn't. So I do think in terms of places that I look forward to talking about that I think are opportunities for improvement around that are, we see some of the best results where you're taking sector-based strategies, prioritize with industry relationships in places that are regionally, priorities. Using data, I think there's a real opportunity there, being that labor market data resource and skills resource, and also just simplifying the ask. When you come to an employer, make the ask really simple around, we can share candidates with you, and we can offset part of the training costs. How can we help?
Mhm.
So those are a couple of the things that I think are challenges where workforce boards can get a bad rap, and some of the ways that we can solve for those.
No, that's great. And I think the point you made about friction is so important because even when the intention is there, the process can make or break the engagement when it comes to workforce boards dealing with employers. So Josh, let's bring this to the systems level. If a workforce board wants to modernize, what's the one system or process they should tackle first in your mind?
Um, Great question. And Melanie, at the risk of sounding a tad bit corny here, the first system to tackle is our mind. I think when I actually initially came to JFF, I came to JFF and JFF Labs specifically to kind of ask this question around how could the workforce system modernize? How could we become more innovative? And Melanie, I'll be honest, a lot of my kind of hypothesis there was around the use of new tools, new technology. Really, how did the world of digital, present new opportunities for, the workforce system to become less archaic? And we're going to get to that part of this conversation, but I just want to share with everybody on the line that the aha I had in talking to so many workforce leaders and those that were really known in the field to be doing things differently, they thought differently,
Mhm.
right? And they were taking more risks. They were seeing beyond just the federal WIOA program and were really starting to talk to partners in their community. We're engaging workers and what they weren't doing well. We're getting in touch and
Mhm.
weren't really complacent with staying out of touch, as somebody in the chat said. So I think this path towards modernization and creating better systems and developing a strategy that's more responsive to the era that we now live in, I think starts with mindset. And starts with leaders who are willing to shake up the culture. And I think the fact that everybody here is on the line and wants to be in this conversation is a first step. I think Melanie, more specifically, when we talk about what systems to modernize or where can we start kind of applying a new approach, I would say for everybody, start with the front door and the first impression first.
Mhm.
We can apply that both to the job center, right? Is like, what are some of those things that we can really do just in terms of thinking about what happens when that person walks in? What is that
Mhm.
experience when they're getting, through, whether it's through, through the intake process, through their experience with that counselor, is the first person they see coming into the job center a security guard?
Mhm.
So I think there are really some things there if we really think about, that first impression and front door. And for the workforce kind of directors on the line, same thing can be said about your website, about how businesses find and interact with you and your staff. This isn't easy. I mean, even JFF struggles with, clear step processes on how to reach us on our, through our website. But I think that, Melanie, is one of the things I've most universally seen across workforce boards that have made major kind of modernization improvements in service
Mhm.
delivery and data collection and operations. It really starts with those questions of how do we fix the front door first and make it easier for workers and employers to find the right help fast. If we're asking that question, then all those other things around how do we update our data system and how do we create more kind of streamlined operations so that the job seeker doesn't have to fill out four forms. Those things follow, I think, when we start to ask some of those simple questions about just improving that experience of the person who both knocks on the physical front door and knocks on our proverbial front door.
No, I love that. And I think what I'm hearing across from all of you is workforce isn't just service, right? It comes from, hey, yes, they do offer wraparound services, but it's engagement. It's really building the system around how we get people, uh, quality people into quality jobs and all in between, right? And so that's really good. So I also heard, accountability does matter, but it's not only accountability, it's design, it's clarity, it's alignment. I heard that pretty much with all of you is we have to be aligned. And so that really brings us to our next piece because none of this happens in a vacuum, right? So workforce boards can't do this work alone. They succeed or fail based on the partnerships that they have and the strength of those partnerships. So, Kristen, I'm going to turn back to you. What do employers need from workforce boards to feel confident in investing time, data, dollars into the regional talent pipeline?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things, and again, I'll piggyback on one thing that Jean had said, which is, first and foremost, that they have an acute talent need or the need to find and hire workers, right? Which is a core point of alignment. And then I think some of the other things that we see as being really important become trust is built through follow through and action, working together towards that action and result, not, meetings and that type of thing. And as we all know, I mean, I lead a network that brings together colleges and corporates. Same frustration is pointed at community colleges to a certain degree and four-year institutions right now, right? We could be having a similar conversation there, where again, whether fairly or unfairly, about speed to market. Are you moving at the pace of business and are you following through, right, on your commitments to be my talent partner? And so, that how we see employers, whomever they're partnering with around talent, it is around who is going to work with me, right, to really, find that talent and build that talent that I need. I also think another thing is, and this builds on what you were just saying, Josh, make it as easy as possible. And I acknowledge as someone, has spent a little bit of time working in the government that we as government agencies, don't always make that easy as well. But, mid-sized small companies can't navigate 15-page PDF documents as easily and quickly, right? So where can we reduce red tape? What can that look like? And where do we think about how we set shared metrics together that really align us versus broad, shared goals? How do we make sure we're actually co-designing, programming, not just reviewing at the end, and really where you've got a vested interest and skim in the game. And then another piece I also think that can be really helpful is just dedicated employer-facing staff.
Mhm.
And there's trade-offs to make, especially in smaller sized organizations, right, around how you deploy your staff. But, depending on, where you are in an evolution, I do think that, those staff and team members that are really skilled in translating, the need of the employer, understanding, right, then the needs of the individual becomes really important as well.
Okay, that's good. That's a good point. It highlights that, employer engagement isn't just about asking employers to show up once. You have to make it easy for them to show up. You got to make them want to show up, and then, continue to foster it as you go. You got to build that trust over time. So that's good. So Josh, you talked about human-centered workforce systems, not just the actual check this, do that, type this. You talked about a human-centered workforce system. What does that actually look like in your mind in a day-to-day in a way that, workforce boards operate?
Yeah, sure. And I think this humans the term human centered, it is a practice. And there are a lot of really good tools that I hope some of you are using out there around, the double diamond and how might we questions, right? Very simple ways to engage in human design in terms of how we think about asking questions, the way we think about convergent and divergent thinking. So, there are some tools of the trade around human-centered design that are worth everybody paying attention to and thinking about how to integrate into the way you do business. I would say human-centered design is really also a philosophy, Melanie, right? It's one of those key
Mhm.
mindsets that we surfaced around, how is it that we need to behave different to be more modern in our approach as a workforce system? And, quite simply, when we say human-centered design, we mean a workforce system that designs its programs, policies, and products with people at the center. And that sounds pretty obvious and easy, but I think that is something we often lose sight of in the workforce system, right? We fixate on, a person is only a job seeker. A person is only an incumbent worker. A person is
Mhm.
only a dislocate. A person is only an apprenticeship.
Right.
And I think, Melanie, what I see working best is when workforce systems really take that human-centered mindset and apply that to how they think about, all the people they're serving. Employers are people too, right? I often say that. We often talk about it as employers as this monolithic thing, but they're really just people too that the workforce system should be trying to better understand and figure out how to meet them where they are. I think Melanie, on a very practical, what does it look like day to day, for the person who's coming to rely on that system, is that it feels less about proving that you deserve help and really more about a partnership on how to solve this problem together. That problem may be help me sign, yes, many people, affiliate the workforce system as just that place I get unemployment insurance. Okay, if that's the first problem that person has, let's solve that first
Mhm.
and then understand what's next. Is it an issue of childcare? It is an issue of you haven't been to school in 30 years and it's a scary thing to do. How do we work with you on that? So I think, some of the more kind of mindset things. And I will also say, I think, I think I sometimes get frustrated when I hear the workforce system, constantly talk about how we serve the community. That service is great. Don't get me wrong, service is great, but I think, this switch and how we can become more community centered, how it's not always outreach, but it's
Mhm.
really also about welcoming in and bringing more people to that table to say how do we solve these problems? How do we build solutions together? Again, I think lack of that kind of behavior and that kind of way of engaging the community is where and why workforce boards get that reputation of being out of touch.
Right.
And we can definitely do better.
Okay. I like how you frame that because it's not, you talked about from the minute they walk in the door earlier, right? To that human center not being just a slogan. It's how does this whole system actually function, right? So Jane, I want to connect back to the policy. So what policy levers give boards room to innovate and what unintentionally boxes them in your mind?
So I'll start with the boxing in first, the negative, and then go to the positive. I think most workforce boards live in fear of, breaking a regulation, of coming under scrutiny by the Department of Labor. So that holds them back from innovating. They feel
Mhm.
like they have to treat every customer, business, and a job seeker exactly the same, or they can report them to the Department of Labor. I mean, some people need a light touch. They can do things electronically. They can do everything online. They're digitally literate. They're able to do it. Other people need heavy touch. So
Mhm.
I think that really works against them. I think the biggest positive for workforce boards is being held accountable by the local elected official. I mean, I think all of us would agree that you can see your mayor or your county exec in the grocery store and complain to them that you can't find talent or complain to them that you can't find a job. So that ability to have it run by the lead elected official rather than, however handsome or beautiful the person is at ETA, the bottom line is you're not likely to meet them. This
Yeah.
person is somebody in your community who knows your business. They not only know the existing businesses, they know the businesses they're trying to attract to that local area, and they can help them with their talent problems both as a selling point for the region, but also before they even break ground, they can make sure they have people in the pipeline so that they're ready to exist. But if I had a magic wand, I would get rid of that fear of an audit.
Oh, I love that because you hear, monitors and audits and from the feds, right? But you're right. You're walking right into the grocery store and you see your local elected official and you got to answer to them about this, that, and the other, right? And so I agree. Boards don't necessarily feel that they can innovate because of all of the tight federal regulations, but there are some boards that have figured it out
Mhm.
and have leveraged other things. But you're spot on. The box in is the regulation, and being able to or not feeling like you can innovate, that really doesn't help at all. But that was a very good point. So I want to go and talk a little bit more about what comes next, right? We're hearing about all of the constraints, what we're hearing from the different corners of the room, but that brings us naturally to what's next for workforce boards. And Josh, this time I want to start with you. Where have you seen technology truly improve workforce board performance, and where is it oversold?
Yeah, I'm on it, and the chat's way ahead of us too.
Yes, I
I
see.
think John started it. I don't want to call him out, but I am calling him out. So there was a robust debate happening in the chat around, human and technological. So I'm trying to not be too distracted by that. And Melanie, I think I will be able to get some of my thoughts out through answering your question. So I think where tech really helps, right? Integrated case management, data systems. Melanie, I know Kraft is doing a lot of that. There are a lot of companies that have been spending, many years really working to try and solve, some of the challenges of how do we make data work in the workforce system, not just for the sake of compliance and reporting, but to really fuel our decision making, help us create better experiences for learners and workers. And we
Mhm.
are making progress. We have not solved it all. But if you're looking for examples of where we're seeing technology, solve for problems, that's one. Another easy one, communication and scheduling, right? Is workforce boards that are integrating automating text messages into their systems so that job seekers weren't waiting around to receive an email that, by the way, they'll never read because they're only responding to text messages. Really, really good place to look for kind of innovation in the technology space. Obviously, labor market data, skills intelligence. I'm spending a lot more time, working with regions and with workforce boards around how to figure out how to make better use of skills data, competency data, yes, LERs and other things. But I think that's another place to look for where workforce boards are really starting to wrap their arms around new technology and digital. Finally, AI.
Mhm.
AI is as kind of a co-pilot for staff. AI is a way of really thinking about how to fine tune our strategy and our operations as
Mhm.
workforce boards is another. So those are some things to look
Okay.
at. I think the things that don't work, silver bullet platforms, right? We're gonna find this one piece of technology that solves all the things, just magically, undoes all these bottlenecks we have and all these policies and procedures. Like let's get over some of that like magical thinking. That there will just be kind of one technology tool that will replace everything else. And
Mhm.
unless Jane knows something different, like the way money works, the way programs work, the way federal and state policy works, that like actually animates the workforce system is not
Mhm.
going to get dramatically less complicated anytime in the
Right.
next 5 to 10 years. So
Right.
we need to create technology that I think adapts to that and recognizes that we have to live in that complexity a little bit. And then the other one to the chat, self-service everything is not the answer. When COVID came around, I was all over it. I was fascinated by how workforce boards were creating new websites and were creating new self-service options, and we've continued down that path, and we need to. I think though, this question of how much does that thinking, block out people with, low digital literacy, language barriers, disabilities. It's real and it comes at a significant cost to what,
Mhm.
Jane has already talked about is that lowercase d democratic mandate of the workforce system.
Right.
So, there's got to continue to be this both and approach to what we can provide online that's easy and a click away and where people still want human connection. I saw Netflix referenced, Amazon referenced. I don't usually watch Netflix alone. I usually like having a human being next to me when I watch it. Whatever it is I buy on Amazon, most cases, I'm sharing that experience or that thing with someone else. And I think the same thing can be said about like, why do we still need places for people to go in the workforce system? It's because, sometimes when times are tough and you don't know where else to go, having a person to talk to about your problem, beats the heck out of any computer screen I've ever met.
Agreed. Agreed. That's a great point. Kristen, I want to follow from from your perspective. What signals tell you that a region is building a pipeline that's truly employer aligned and not just well intentioned?
Yeah, and I saw a comment in the chat. Again, this is a really good chat. The around just also that employers are enthusiastic about the concept, but often lack the long-term commitment needed, right? And I do think that sustained attention and sustained partnership is really important and can be a challenge, right, from employers. Because in part because of the reality of just cyclical hiring phases, staff turnover and transition, especially in small and mid-sized organizations. And so, I think that challenge is real. With that said, again, bringing an employer lens, I think the signals that are really important are, do you have generally repeat employer engagement, right? That sustains the one individual or the one function. Because in general, right, you see the employers and the individuals who are working to solve their talent challenges with them are voting with their time, right? If you've got the same set of employers, you continue to work with you, that tells you that, that it's working, right? You're building that trust, et cetera. I also think another piece that's important is, are we seeing not just people placed, but are we seeing that people are staying and retained in roles, right? This goes back to the initial conversation around good jobs too, right? Are we actually placing people in good jobs? And is that matching and that preparation really working?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I also think we, as a sector, and this is not just workforce boards, we do a lot
Mm-hmm.
of piloting, we do a lot of testing, we do a lot of, projects. And so are we seeing, right, sustained commitment, sustained funding, and that, programs outlive pilot phases? I think that's another important piece. And again, are we seeing mid-size and small businesses,
Mm-hmm.
in the room? It's not just about the large employers, but that and often, sector-based approaches, right? That we've got strength in key industries that are critical to the region.
Right.
I see, in some cases, workforce boards are actually then sending a signal to some of the other partners in regions, right? When you're working with the other stakeholders. I was talking to a college president yesterday who said they're actually aligning, they're in a Midwestern state, they have aligned their whole industry engagement strategy to what the state and workforce board strategy is around the priority sectors and industries so that they can make sure they're being responsive as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about something that then is bigger than just, right, the individual workforce board itself. So those are a
Exactly.
couple things that I think are indicators of success.
Okay. Great points. Thank you. And Jane, before we jump to the next section, I want to ask you if you could change one thing in the federal or at the federal or state level to strengthen workforce boards' impact, what would that one thing be?
So first, I would give them more money, because I just want to make a point, Melanie. In 2009, the ETA budget was $14 billion. Today, it's not even 8 billion. That's an
Mm-hmm.
error. That's a mistake. Okay, so now I'll answer your question. What one thing would I change? I would I would make it totally, I would give them credit for things that they should be doing in my mind, like thought leadership things in their local area, bringing people together around discussing AI implementation sectorally, giving them credit for bringing in people to say, what does competency-based education mean, and how does that relate to, skills-based hiring? Those discussions are not happening enough. Some local chambers are doing them, some boards are doing them, but they're not happening enough. And there's a lot of confused employers out there, and there are a lot of confused workers out there.
Okay, I agree. So we've talked about modernization, we've talked about alignment, we've talked about policy. So I want to zoom out one more time, and because the question, the real question is, what do workforce boards need to become in order to thrive in the next era of workforce development? And so we're going to fast forward 5 years, right? What separates workforce boards that are thriving from those that are struggling? And Josh, I want to start with you.
All right. I think and some of this is already happening. But I think that I hope this accelerates, right? I think it starts with what we're seeing here in the chat, right? Workforce boards that are actively reimagining their role and kind of reestablishing their purpose in their community. And I will say, um, doing that in a way that is less beholden to the federal government, right? Is workforce boards are increasingly, becoming of the image of something that is much bigger than just WIOA. And I
Yeah.
think that's what creates so much confusion on what does a workforce board actually do. Anybody who actually got it down into a sentence, they should probably like trademark it. Um, but I think that's it, right? And these shifts are like continue this shift from organizations that just manage a federal program or a couple of federal programs and really become an organization that is thinking about, systemic response to economic mobility for people and economic vitality for the place that I'm representing. I think this, some of this is going on here in the chat too around, kind of from bean counting to outcomes, right? Is really getting away from just measuring, the activities or our performance and really start thinking about are we putting people into quality jobs? Are the types of businesses that we're bringing to our community, are they making people better off? And are we actually able to train people and provide them with the skills that they need to be able to effectively compete in new industries? Um, and I think also it's just, we got to continue to embrace, disruption,
Yeah.
right? I think we're going to continue to be, challenged to change in a lot of ways. And I think instead of kind of trying to avoid that, finding more ways to face that head on and doing that in community, I think is a really good thing for us to keep doing.
All right. Awesome. Kristen, over to you for 1 minute.
Okay, start the timer now. Well, I think in the future, fundamentally, we should be asking ourselves, I think, two questions. Are the people who need jobs and have the least access to opportunity getting them, right? And are we putting them in a position to do so? And as part of that, are we ensuring that the assets that we have in our regions are really being pointed towards our economic future, not, the past. So like those two kind of North Stars. So what does that look like? Well, and again, I know that this is happening in many cases, but how can we ensure that workforce boards are architecting systems, not just administering, what's
I
happening
love that.
in a region, be that connective tissue between employers, colleges, K-12, the economic development and social services agencies
Hmm.
around those North Stars. I think a key part of that then does mean, increased, I'm going to call it data fluency and
Hmm.
and literacy, but that also is, the incorporation of technology as a tool to support that work, not as the panacea or solution, as has been shared by many others.
Hmm.
Um, and a real focus on outcomes, not inputs. I think the moving from we had some discussion both in the chat and here around compliance and limitations, but as much as possible, and I think that's a place right for best practice and practice sharing, but as much as possible, not being limited by compliance where we don't have to be. I acknowledge we can't break free of the burdens of compliance in many cases, but really, working to be as, customer and goal focused as possible. So those are some of the things that I think we can do in the future and I
Yes.
know are already doing in many ways.
Yes, they have to be done more. I agree. And Jane, we're gonna let you bring us home on this one.
I'm going to agree with Josh and Kristen absolutely on everything they said. I'm going to get much more nuts and bolts about it. If a workforce board hasn't already created a 501(c)(3), do it today so that you can take philanthropic and CSR money. Be brave and braid. Use that TANF money, use that, all the SNAP money, use everything you can and take a risk. Then the next thing I would say is take on your governor and blow up the archaic eligible training provider list that most states haven't changed in decades. They wait for the law to be reauthorized and forget that, and they're not able to take advantage of the innovative providers that have developed since the list was last put in place. And finally, I would just say, really be brave. Be brave with your employers and dedicate some money to your staff. Make sure we're talking about getting other people jobs and creating new talents for them. Too often you forget to improve the talents of the staff right there at your American Job Center. They need to be updated on these things. They need to learn what's new and they need to learn new tactics. Kristen, I loved dedicated staff for employers, and that dedicated staff should get real professional development.
I
I,
love
I,
that.
I want to also claim +1 on all of Jane's answers too, just for the record.
I love that. This has been a rich conversation this afternoon, and I don't think that I have ever been on a webinar with this active of a chat. So I love it. This means this is a good topic and people are passionate about it and they're loving it. So with our last few minutes, I want to dive into the Q&A. We've had some great questions come through. And so I'm gonna start. Edward asks, are you able to provide examples of regions where the workforce boards and their partnerships are exemplifying the future state? So in all of your work around the country, is there a workforce board and a partnership that are really innovating and seeing things in the future? I have one in my mind, but you all are the panelists. Go ahead.
Also hesitant to do this, but I'm going to call out Dallas. Always been a great innovator. Under previous leadership, new leadership seems to be doing really well. I'll give you one example. They were looking for a sterilization techs in hospitals in Dallas during COVID, and you know who they recruited? Nail techs. It was brilliant, right? I mean, thinking outside of the box and solving problems.
Oh, that was awesome. Anybody else want to chime in? So I heard Dallas.
Melanie, I see some people on the chat. I wonder if anybody from the chat wants to come off and school us or share a shiny example.
Okay. Well, I don't think that we're not able to do that.
Oh, they got to put it in.
Yeah.
Well, they can put it in the chat. Yeah.
Put it in the chat, so.
I do feel like we've talked about some good theme areas. And so I actually love the idea of crowdsourcing this one around, overall, as we've talked about the vision, but also specific elements of what we're talking about. Because I also think individuals who are part of workforce boards might be more willing to raise their hand on something that is an individual thing they're doing really well.
Awesome. All right, next question is, when should boards partner with the community versus do it themselves? And how should they think about expanding versus focus impact? That's packed. That's a lot in there. Who wants to take a stab at that?
But Jean talked about being, a recovering government professional. I'll put on my recovering strategy consultant hat on this one. But I think in general, a really important piece there is, is it core to your priority areas and goals? Do you have the expertise and bandwidth to engage in it? And or you should partner where it helps you move faster. You've got the expertise, relationships, or be entity needed in the community that can do it with you. That's how you should think about when to either build or partner around things like this. And if it's not core to your mission,
Hmm.
and if there is a good, this, trusted partner in the community that you can work with, I do think partnering is, superior. If the answers, are no to that, then you might need to think of something else. But I think that in general is a good framework to be using to think about when to partner or not.
Okay, good. Next question from Fran is, what is the most important goal of a workforce board? And because boards are often asked to address all workforce issues, and we mentioned a little bit of scope creep, and we saw in the chat when we asked them to define workforce boards in one sentence, we got the kitchen sink, if you will. But what would you say is the most important goal of a workforce board?
I mean, keeping their community economically, thriving.
Okay, that's
Uh,
good.
I mean, for me, it's helping people that want to work connect with work that's worth doing. That pays a living wage that allows that individual and their family to do as well as they can be doing, and also to meet our other dual mandate of really working with employers that I think in some cases we've always worked with. I think these days is being even more attuned to how industries are changing, how new businesses may present the opportunity to move in and provide good jobs to workers.
Hmm.
Again, put it simply is put it simply of the dual mandate of, help the worker find good work and help the business find a good worker is the job. That's the
Yeah,
purpose. But, once you get into the mechanics, it gets a little bit more difficult.
yeah. The how. Everybody has a different view on the how, but that is the goal. I would agree. Are there specific policy changes workforce boards and state governments should evaluate to unlock greater impact other than money? And I'm going to ask Jane to answer this
So I think there should be like a real look at how do you use that governor's set aside pot
one.
really creatively? How do you use that as moving forward rather than just, kind of gap funding when competitive grants go away? I think there could be really innovative things going on. That's a significant pot of money in most states, and I don't think it's always used in that vein.
I will add, this is a really positive trend I'm seeing happening, Jane. I'm sure you're seeing it happen too, right? Is like in my early days in this profession, I was very much kind of baptized in the state versus local mentality. But Jane, that's changing. I mean, a lot of local workforce boards, leaders I've talked to in Michigan and Connecticut and Kansas and Washington State, they are now actively ideating with leaders at the state level. Yes, both as we could use some funding to support this. But I think again in the face of dwindling federal funds, I think one of the silver linings here is we are seeing a shift in that relationship between some of the local leaders and state leaders who are really starting to try and come together and find ways of how do we create statewide strategy? How do we make statewide investments that are kind of really strategic and standard and can help everyone in the local workforce system really do their jobs better. But I
Okay.
agree. I think policy can really help accelerate that and make some of that state set aside funding more readily, something that more local workforce boards can readily tap.
Okay. Josh, this one might be for you. Are there any call outs for what workforce boards are doing with technology to improve impact? Any platform recommendations other than the amazing stuff that we do here at Craft? I'm just going to say, are there any other recommendations that you
Yeah, I mean, I would say on that one, holler at me, right? This is about, it's starting with the problem first and not the solution. I think that's Melanie, that would be another one of my like where it doesn't work, right? I've
right,
seen us
right.
sometimes start too much with the whiz bang technology in search of a problem versus defining the problem
Yes.
and then, selecting the technology that solves it. So, whoever that is, come find me. The craft team will share emails and all that stuff, but happy to talk and see what problem you're trying to solve, and if there's a technology out there that might help you.
Okay,
I want to underscore that answer. I do
sure.
think that is really important in terms of, the problem that you're trying to solve, and the resources and the team, right? And your local environment. That is critical as you're thinking about technology solutions. But I think there's a lot of really interesting experimentation out there right now, and that is certainly a place where practice sharing, collaboration, what's working, right? What are we experimenting with, and what are we learning? What are we experimenting with, and what is failing or not working, and why? I think is really important in this moment, because technology implementations can really distract, and just you can lose time on stuff. So I do think that just sharing is really important.
And be expensive. I mean,
Yeah,
if you don't have to start at square one. Lean on your partners. I mean, sometimes the partners that you fail to lean on, like the libraries, like your community colleges, like the four-year institutions in your area, it's silly. They have research that you could really learn from.
Yeah.
okay, I agree. I think we have time for one more. What makes an employer partnership real versus transactional? Kristen, I'd like for you to lead this one.
Sure. I think it's a really good question. And again, as Josh prefaced when he said, it's mindset. I'm going to be a little bit cheesy in my answer, which is it's about like trust and
Mhm.
repeated engagement, and and not just asking transactional questions around transactional solutions, but really deeply working together to co-design, to both understand the problem, its root causes, and then design the solution around it. That's where we see, and that can take a little bit longer. It can require actually having moments where there is disagreement or friction that you work through and get to the other side of for a better solution and come out with greater trust. So I know that sounds generic, but that's in looking at high performing
Mhm.
partnerships across employers and their partners, whether workforce boards or colleges. That's really what it's about. And then then you've got the roots to evolve to solve different problems
Yeah,
together, not just the one problem that you transacted on briefly, right? It
I
unlocks
agree.
for much more work together and deeper understanding.
I love that. It starts transactional, but then you build that trust in that relationship, and then you can do so much more within the community. I absolutely want to say a big thank you to our panelists and all of you for joining. This has been an amazing conversation. Workforce boards truly are economic engines in our communities. And as we've heard today, their future depends on how boldly we modernize, align, and invest in them. If you're interested in learning more about how Craft supports workforce boards and partners with tracking, reporting, and work-based learning infrastructure, you can visit crafteducation.com/demo to learn more or schedule a conversation. And if you'd like to learn more about about Craft or join our upcoming webinar on Apprenticeships 101 registration and funding workshop, we'll spend some time breaking down the registration and funding process and show how to launch your first registered apprenticeship with confidence. This will be held on March 31st, and you can scan the QR code on your screen or click the link in the chat to register. And before you go, we would love your feedback. A short survey will pop up when you exit the webinar. You'll receive a follow-up email with the recording and the resources discussed today, along with the answers to the questions that we didn't have time to answer. And again, we want to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day. And big thank you again to the panelists.